Hey everybody, Brian here. Today we're going to talk about my Logic Drums to Anything script and its use with IK Multimedia's MODO Drums, which is a really cool drum library, becoming one of my favorites. It has some really cool features that allow you to take Logic's drums and really de-boringize them. Yes, I've just invented a new word, and let's face it, who wants boring?
I had it all. I had a wardrobe that was getting very respectable.
With their drums, and MODO Drums definitely gives us some pretty cool possibilities. So let's get to it. First, let's open MODO Drum. So here we are, and I think by default it'll have the studio kit loaded. If not, just load the studio kit, and under mapping, make sure the default is selected. So choose default, and then we're going to take a look at a few things.
I know what you're thinking. Did he fire 6 shots or only 5?
First, the pieces that are loaded are the ones that are kind of lit up. The ones that are shaded, those are not loaded. So you can see that here. There's a kick 2 not loaded, a tom 1 not loaded, some cymbals that are not loaded. And the other thing to take note of is for pieces like the snare, by default snare position control is turned off and it assumes CC1. For toms, they also support position control, which is really cool. Also by default off with CC1 by default. And the hi-hat position control, that's also by default off with CC1. So with this particular kit, we have a couple crash cymbals, a splash, cowbell, tambourine clap, so some percussion, a ride cymbal of course, 4 toms, a kick, a snare. And under mixer, just to highlight something, I've boosted the hi-hat way up. So I'm going to close out of here. All we've done is loaded the studio kit and made sure we have the default MIDI map. And now here I have a Logic drummer part that I've purposefully set up to have a lot of hi-hat variation, as well as to produce some percussion like claps, tambourine, as well as edited to add some cowbell and some china and splash hits. So I'm going to open up the script. So on this track I have Logic's MIDI scripter loaded, and I've loaded this Logic Drums to MODO script. You would do the same. And you might not see this GUI at first, that's okay. You go to open script in editor, and then just hit run script right off the bat. And so if you didn't see this interface at first, you would see it now. And I'm just going to walk through the script to talk about how it's set up. I always have a section that talks about what the script was written for, in this case MODO Drum Studio Kit using its default MIDI mapping. And then we have this variable CC range source, that just talks about how Logic handles CC control for hi-hat opening and closing. These are the exact breakpoints that Logic uses. And then down to this variable CC range as target. This talks about how the target library, in this case MODO Drums, handle CC control. So we can use CC control for hi-hats, as well as position control for snare and toms. The script assumes that CC number 4 is going to be for hi-hats, 16 for snares, 19 for tom. This can be changed, but I suggest just keeping it the way the script assumes. And then we have the Logic notes. This typically won't change from script to script unless you're making changes to your actual Logic note layout. This variable UN, user-defined notes, that typically will stay the same as well between kits. This just gives you the ability to use unused Logic notes to do things like triggering snare, Flam, Ruff, roll, as well as using additional cymbal articulations like a choke on a ride. Even though Logic doesn't have that, you can still use that note to trigger a choke sound in a library that supports it. MODO does not support ride choking, but it supports choking on china and splash. And then here's the target articulation list, in this case the target being MODO Drums. This is everything that it contains. Regardless of if it's loaded in a kit, what I've done is I've written out every single note that is possible in MODO in its default MIDI map. Also, I've added notes about which pieces are not loaded in the studio kit. So kick 2 is not loaded, but the thing is, in MODO Drums, regardless if a piece is loaded or not, it'll always play back something. So if kick 2 is not loaded, it's just going to play back as kick 1. If a tom isn't loaded, say in this kit tom 1 is not loaded, that's playing back as tom 2. So that's something to take note of. It's a feature of MODO that actually makes using the script with any loaded MODO kit ridiculously easy. And here's its various cymbals, percussion. And then onto the mapping. So Logic has this kick 1, kick 2. This is how the script maps those.
You can spot these assholes by watching the way they bet. like this guy.
So kick 1 is the beater variations for both 1 and 2. This means either this one or this one will be chosen by the script randomly. And then with snares, because MODO supports snare position control, this gives us the ability to make a Logic snare center trigger a variety of snare center kind of sounds in MODO. So when a Logic snare center is played, it's going to assign this AID of 1. Because of this AID assign parameter being 1, and CC num parameter 16. The script will look at this CC16 entry, 1, and it'll randomly generate some CC value between 0 and 63, which in MODO will play back a variety of center-ish kind of sounds. And likewise with the edge, in this case using this AID assign parameter with a value of 2, which results in edge-ish kind of snare hits. And then using the user-defined logic notes, snare, flam, rough, and roll, with the flam, etc. parameter to trigger those kind of sounds using some MIDI magic.
What's in the core? This is the gateway.
And then hi-hats, this is one of the best features of the script. I went through quite the wild, crazy journey to figure out how Logic handles hi-hat opening and closing. And this might look a little mind-numbing, but the bottom line is when Logic is using its HH tip, shank, and edge articulations, and opening and closing those, the script's going to translate all of that into the target library, in this case MODO. So Logic's tip is going to trigger the HHCC tip in MODO. The shank will trigger the shank. The edge will also trigger the shank because MODO doesn't have an edge articulation. And so this guarantees super precise translation of Logic's handling of hi-hats to MODO. So then Logic has a foot close, foot splash, as does MODO. That's how those translate. With toms, because it supports position control, we can also do something similar to what we were doing with the snare, which is use this AID assign parameter along with a CC number. So in all these cases, we're going to have a Logic tom mapping to some tom in MODO. So Logic's low toms going to the floor toms in MODO, and these mids going to tom 3 and 2, and the high is going to tom 2 and 1. So some overlap, but that's what happens when you have this 3 distinct Logic toms, and we're mapping up to 5 in MODO. And then for any tom hit, it's going to be given randomly an AID of 1 or 2. And so when it's 1, it's going to be a center-ish tom hit. When it's 2, it's going to be an edge-ish kind of hit. So that's a really great way to get some variety out of the tom tone. And the ride mapping is pretty straightforward. Logic's edge going to the edge in MODO. Same thing with the bell. It doesn't have in-out articulations, so I'm just mapping Logic's in-out to the edge as well.
Oh my God, you didn't hear. I'm so sorry. Shlomo had a scuba diving accident.
And then with cymbals, in MODO, regardless of the kit, the crash 16 and 17 are kind of towards the left in the stereo fields. So that way a Logic left crash is going to trigger either a crash 16 or 17. One will be chosen randomly. If you wanted one to be, say, 2 times more often, you could just use this likelihood of occurrence weight, colon 2. That'll make that one 2 times more likely. But we'll just keep it this way. And likewise, Logic's choke is going to trigger choking of these cymbal hits in MODO. With the right similar mindset, we're taking the right-ish sounding hits in MODO, which is the 18 and the 20 crash cymbals, specifying its choke, and then using some unused Logic notes, China crash, splash crash, here mapping to MODO's China sounds, splash mapping to MODO splash, and likewise the chokes mapped as they need to be. And because we have these hits like the EFX and bell, this is a good time to use those other user-defined notes that we saw above. So cymbal other 1, cymbal other 2. In the case of EFX 1, it is a choke hit as well. So that's how we map that. And then that bell 10 in MODO, we can just use, say, cymbal other 2 crash, map to that. Then there's no shaker in MODO, but if we want a Logic shaker to translate to something, then I guess a tambourine in MODO is the best bet. And then Logic's tambourine goes to the tambourine in MODO. Logic's clap goes to clap. Cowbell goes to the cowbell. Then down here, most people won't have any need for this. This is a pretty advanced feature of the script. The script can automatically translate CC foot pedal data to automatically generate chick and splash sounds. So here we're just specifying the MODO foot close and foot open sound. So I'm going to hit run script again just to be safe. I always recommend doing that once you're ready. And I'll hit play. I'm gonna stop it there because I don't know if you're noticing it, but the hi-hats sound pretty ridiculously lame. And that's because of the fact that, remember what I said earlier about the CC control being disabled by default in MODO? So here I'm back in this mapping tab. I've clicked on hi-hat here, and I'm gonna click this where we turn it on, and I'm gonna change this to 4, because that's what the script is expecting. And likewise, I'm gonna click on snare, because let's get snare position control happening. So we'll turn that on, set this to 16, and then for the toms, click on each one, set it to 19, turn it on. So it's on 2, it's also on, set that to 19, 3, and the floor toms also to 19. By the way, notice when I clicked on tom 1, it went from being gray to lit up. I'll talk about that feature of MODO in a second. Don't worry about that for now. And now at this point, I recommend you save the MIDI preset. I'm gonna call this default with CC. I'm gonna close and play this back. Now, do you hear that? The hi-hats sound way better. You hear that. So the hi-hats are now opening and closing, whereas before they were just playing back one static kind of sound, which probably wouldn't be desirable in any imaginable drum production scenario unless you're trying to produce really stale, boring sounding drums, and maybe you are. In that case, you can go back and turn off the hi-hat control. But I'm assuming if you're watching this video, you want to actually get the most out of Logic drums with MODO, so that's what we're doing. Now I want to show you how exactly the script is using this tom position control, for instance. So here I have all Logic toms playing back, so it's low, mid, high toms. And take a look at what MODO is doing with its position control on toms. And in the output here, we see that action with CC values being generated. Then MODO was playing back various types of tom hits, depending on what those CC values meant for position control, whether it's toward the center or the edge. Like always with the snares, so these are Logic snare center hits, and then followed by edge hits. And we hit play. Now we're looking at the snare position control in MODO. So again, we have that variation going on because of the way the script is using some randomization and the generation of CC data.
Do it! I can't put...
And now that we made those changes in MODO enabling CC control, we can bring as much life as possible to this Logic drummer part. We'll get the hi-hats working perfectly, snare, tom, position control to add some variety to the tone in those instruments. So I'm gonna hit run script. You don't have to at this point if you've already hit run script, but hitting that clears out this console. So if you have a ton of output there. And by the way, you can turn off that output. If you go to the actual GUI, you could uncheck off this show console output, but I'm gonna keep it checked on for now. And we'll hit play. And I know those tambourine hits were super loud, maybe very annoying.
Hey, want to hear the most annoying sound in the world?
But I did that just so it's more audible, so you could hear how Logic Percussion was translating over. So you saw the snare and tom control, the hi-hats were sounding dynamic, and I think you'll agree that this sort of playback is far more interesting than if we were to play back without any of that added functionality.
Oh, this is the way you do it, huh? Showing up at my apartment?
I'm not going to be ignored, Dan.
I ignored this a moment ago, and now I'm going to get to it, which is what happens when you click on unloaded notes. So here I am in that studio kit under mapping, and kick 2 is grayed out. Then I click it, and now it loads the kick 2, and China 2 was grayed out, so I'm going to click that, and now it adds a China. Whereas before the China 20 was actually playing back as a crash 16. That's no longer the case. Click on crash 17. That's now been added. EFX1. That's now added. Likewise, crash 20. China. The bell. And the really cool thing is you could make all those changes and not have to touch anything in the script. Now I'm going to go back to MODO, and we saw how we can edit a kit and the script doesn't need to be touched. Well, you can also just add a different kit. So now let's say we want to go full out.
You're serious? You don't know. Everybody knows you never go full retard. What do you mean?
Click on Extreme, Mapping. It already has everything loaded. I go to Mixer. I want the hi-hats to be more audible. And I wish we could set the cowbell to +12. It only goes to 6. I'll boost up the tambourine. Hit play. Different sounding kit, but everything is working fine. And again, for bookkeeping purposes, you could have made some edits here to specify that this was for the MODO Drums Extreme kit, but we don't have to touch the mapping itself, which is really awesome, which is one of the reasons I'm really into this MODO plugin lately.
The moment I do, are you gonna stick me with that broken piece of plate?
I want to show you how you can get some choking in the game. So remember, we can use unused Logic notes to handle things like China or splashes, and Logic already has choke notes for its crashes. So what I've done here is I've edited this drummer MIDI a little bit. So here we have a crash. It would be a China in a MODO kit that actually has a China, but this is just playing back as a regular crash. And then we have a Logic crash left, along with its choke note that I've added here. And here we have a splash hit. And then later I've added another splash hit followed by a splash choke. So we can play back. Now I want to talk a little more about choking. I know it's strange to have that kind of desire, but it's a pretty important topic. Here we are in the scripter, and you may have noticed some of this business about choking. And because I know MODO doesn't support aftertouch bass choking, I don't have anything in here regarding that. But even if I did specify in here, and by the way, if I wanted this one to trigger channel aftertouch, I'll just write out AT. You can read the manual if you want to learn more about that. And even if I save this, I can make changes to how choking happens in the GUI. I'm just going to put that back to how it was. And what I've done in this MIDI here is here's that Logic crash. There's the choke note, for now it's muted. There's channel aftertouch, and also I've added poly aftertouch messages. The script is pretty advanced in what it offers you in terms of choking. So there's 3 situations. You have a choke note in the source that has to be translated, so the source here is Logic, or you have poly aftertouch that has to be translated, or you have channel aftertouch. In Logic, you're probably typically going to have a choke note, but because my Logic to Anything script is really an anything to anything, you might have source aftertouch data, and you want to play back in MODO and get the choke into it. So I'm going to show you these 3 cases. Situation 1, so I'm going to enable this choke note. I'm going to set these others to none. I'm going to set the target to choke note. That means a choke note in Logic is going to trigger a choke note in MODO. If we play that back, the kick and snare are kind of loud there, but you probably heard the choking happen. Now let's say we wanted to have the script use channel aftertouch instead. So the Logic choke note is going to trigger channel aftertouch messages in MODO. It's kind of subtle, but there's no choking there. In the output, you see that aftertouch data is being sent, but MODO can't do anything with that. That's why we need this set to choke note. Same thing would happen if you chose poly aftertouch. Even though the script is producing poly aftertouch data, Modo isn't doing anything with it. So this only works if this is set to choke note. Now I'm going to mute that choke note. Now let's say instead we have a situation where you hit channel aftertouch. And the same thing, I'm not going to show you the cases where it doesn't work. I'm just going to immediately go to target choke note. So an aftertouch message is going to trigger a choke note in Modo. So this will work. You hear that choking. Now let's say we have poly aftertouch data. So I'm just going to set this one to none. Poly aftertouch in the source will trigger a choke note in the target. In this case, it's these P messages that are relevant. You heard that choke. I want to show you another useful feature of the script. So you have these user-defined snare, flam, ruff, and roll notes, and I've added those to this MIDI here. That's what these three notes are. A snare flam is A-1, snare ruff is A#-1, snare roll is B-1, and I'll hit play. So in this case we heard a flam, a roll, and a ruff. And I guess the only difference between a flam and a ruff is a flam tends to be, I guess, 2 hits, a ruff is 3, so that's how I program things in the script. But in any case, this is a pretty easy way to, again, take the logic outputted MIDI, make some small edits that let the script do its magic and bring more variety to the playback. And you can change some of these parameters. If you want the roll to be a little slower, you can move this slider down. If you want it to be comically fast, you would move it all the way to the right. It already has built-in timing variation, but if you wanted the variation to be as high as possible, then just move those to the right. If it's all the way to the left, then it's going to have no variation, and it's going to sound more like a machine gun. So in the middle is probably a good idea. Now I'm back over in Logic, and here's this drummer part that I converted to a MIDI region, and I decided to go ahead and add the cymbal of the 1 and the other 2 so we can get that EFX and that bell hit in, just so you can see how easy this really is. So I'm going to open the script again. And maybe if I wanted to, I would add a little note here with all articulations. But that's just cosmetic kind of stuff. I'm not actually making any changes to the script. And that's because these extra hits that weren't loaded, remember, they were still playing back. They were just doubling up as something. Now they're going to play back as the actual intended articulation. This bell will no longer be the Ride 22 bell. It's going to be that actual bell. Likewise with the EFX. No changes needed in the mapping. Everything's already set up. And I'll hit play again. And so you heard those additional cymbal hits. The script was working as designed, no issues. You can always look at the output to make sure everything was mapping. So if you saw something like a kick being mapped to a tom, then you would know you have a serious issue. You need to get that straightened out.
Okay, this won't hurt, and it'll be over in just a moment.
Uh-huh. What's that?
Conductant.
A little dab will do ya.
But all is well. And that concludes the video. You saw how easy it is to use any Modo kit and have the script do its thing without any changes at all to any of the variables. I also showed you under the mapping how you need to enable position control for the snare, toms, for hi-hat. And with those enabled, you saw how the script can do some randomization to get the snares and toms to be varied in their tone, which is a cool thing. And I showed you some other advanced functionalities, such as generating these kind of flam, ruff, and roll articulations, and explaining some of the nuances about choking. So hopefully everything made sense, and if not, then please just get in touch. Then just say so in the comments. And even though this video was about Modo, hopefully you appreciate the fact that my Logic Drums to Anything, which is really an anything to anything mapper, it's basically a new drum language. So it doesn't matter what the library is, Modo, Superior Drums, the script can handle any imaginable library and take advantage of all the unique features that a given library has. And obviously that's a pretty huge deal for drum production. And that's all for now. Till next time.